Hello and welcome back to Mad Mouse Games. Now, something that I like to do, like several of you who watch my videos probably, is I like to watch other people's YouTube videos and see how they paint things. So when I saw this little friar miniature being painted by Dr. Faust's Painting Clinic, I decided that I was going to try some of the techniques he used in that video and see how close I could get my miniature to looking like his. Now, the reason I do this is in order to become a better painter, I think that sometimes you have to try and copy other people's work. If you can copy someone else's work or even improve on it, then you can grow as a painter and trying new things, trying painting techniques the way that other people do them, I think is something that is fairly healthy and can help you improve a lot as a painter. That's part of the reason why I'm doing these videos, is because I am a novice painter, and I don't know how long he has been painting miniatures, but it's a whole heck of a lot longer than me, and he makes some amazing looking things. So if I could get anything that looks even close to that, that's what I want to try for. So there's a link to his video down in the description if you want to check it out, because he'll explain how he layers and stuff a lot better. But I'm just going to kind of go over a couple of things that I learned as I was painting this guy. So first what I did was I just base coated him with this darker brown color. I didn't work it up from black like he did because I didn't want to paint my whole miniature black because that's just not how I do it. And so I started just by trying to layer the same kind of way that he does. And one thing he talked a lot about was thinning his paints down a lot. Now, I'm sure he doesn't use craft paints, and I found that when you thin down craft paints, it's a tricky business. A little too much water, and there's not really a good way of fixing it to make it thicker, but not enough water, it's too thick, it's globby. But I found that just adding a little bit of water with a lot of patience and practice, by the end of this video I was able to add just a little bit of water, and it was just about the perfect amount to thin out the paints the way I wanted. Now, another thing that I learned from doing this kind of layering techniques. This is something that I tried on the three-headed troll, kind of, um, before I had seen his video. And one of the things I thought was interesting was how bright the paint looks when you put it on. For example, right now, when I'm applying a lot of this paint, it looks really bright. But the thing is, if it's thin, it will dry darker than it actually looks. Another thing that I'm kind of doing as I'm applying this is sometimes if the color is too bright and I think it's going to dry too bright, or there's going to be a harsh line from where I stopped layering the last time, I will go back with the color I had used previously and just wet blend a little bit the edges. And I don't even know if you would call it wet blending because it was basically just one stroke over it. So it was more layering basically, but it was just layering the old color back over the top of it to bring those bright hues back down a little bit to where I would actually want them. But I mean, as you can see, the other thing I did was I would basically layer, I think, twice with the thin down paint on most of the colors until the end when it was getting really, brighter hues in there. And then I started to just do a single layer of that paint and slowly work my way up, making it a little bit brighter every time. So it did take me quite a while to kind of perfect the paints, and every time I would move up a hue, I would usually test it on one section, and sometimes I would have to, either add darker paint to it to make it a little darker, or add a little bit of a lighter paint or more water to make it more thinned down. It was just a lot of trial and error that I had done on this miniature, and it's something that just takes a little bit of time, patience, and practice. I think by the end, I got a fairly good looking kind of layering going down. I thought looked pretty good. Now, one thing that I didn't like, just personally, my taste about the miniature that um, was done by the other YouTuber. was that his miniature seemed to be awfully bright. And I wanted this miniature to be kind of a little bit darker, not quite as bright highlights. And so that's something that I did personally. Um, as I tried to mimic his style, I guess you could say, and mimic the way that he was doing the layering, I changed it just a little bit to kind of suit my own preferences. So here, this was one example where I put down a color that was way too bright. And so I came back with the color I had used before, and it just still didn't work and was making it worse. So something I did, you can see right here, is I just added some water real quick while that paint was still dry and wiped most of it off, and then came back through and reapplied the next layer of highlight after I had darkened it down. So that's just a little tip. If you do mess up, if you're quick enough with water and it's still wet paint, you can get most of it off. You can also do it with your finger, but I've found that going through with that wet paint brush and just trying to get it all off really quick can be very successful. And one thing I also learned about painting in this technique is when you come back and paint the other layers, like for example, his cloak, his hood, the book he's holding, the bags that he's carrying, you have to be very careful not to mess up your previous paint job. So, one thing I've been learning a lot more also and working on that I would say is drastically improved since I first started painting miniatures again a couple months ago is my brush control. Being able to control how the brush moves and where I want the brush to go. I've been able to avoid messing up the paint job, and that was one thing I was really proud about with this miniature was I felt like I didn't mess up any of the paint job that I had accomplished when I went to paint other things, and so I didn't even have to worry about that too much. But here we're getting kind of toward the end of me painting his tunic, and one thing that I also learned in doing this kind of layering technique is obviously you want to cover less and less surface area every time. And so toward the end, I was kind of making more of triangle shaped highlights just at kind of the base of his cloak. And the reason for that is because the surface area is decreasing every time, just a little bit. And so it's kind of forcing the most basic of the shape into how the folds of his cloak are. You can see the folds are kind of tall triangles, so the highlights are also kind of tall triangles that you kind of layer and blend up toward the top. So the top of the folds are a little bit darker than the bottom base of the folds where it would be, dragging on the ground, getting more wear and tear, etc. So you can also see me here doing the same kind of technique on his hood. So I added real dark in the recesses and then just worked my way up. And this one I layered a little bit differently because I put down kind of the middle coat first because I wanted to try that, putting down, kind of the mid-tone coat first and then putting the darker spots in the darker recesses and the lighter spots on the higher part and kind of layering it that way just to see how it would work. And it actually ended up being pretty good, other than I did have to come back in with the original base color a few times to kind of wet blend it in so there wasn't as drastic a change. So definitely I think one thing I learned with the layering was, either starting dark and working your way up lighter or something I'm going to try in the future is starting lighter and working my way darker. But this is the finished product. It's definitely not the same as his miniature because it is a lot lighter. The bags are lighter than his bags and things like that. But another thing I tried with this was doing like a black line in between like the ropes on his belt and the cross on his belt and the tunic, and I thought that ended up looking really good. And that was something that I also got from his video, and so I encourage you to go check that out. Again, link in the description. But if you enjoyed this, comment, subscribe, like, and we'll see you in the future.